So was there a specific day, a conversation or a moment that you can point to where the decision stopped being hypothetical and then became real? Because it was brewing in the back of your mind. And then sometimes people describe it as like, I saw it clearly and that was it. And that's what convinced me. You convinced yourself at some point.
Yeah. I'm trying to trace back to the exact moment. I just remember when I thought about quitting my job, I called a couple of my friends. I was like, hey, like, I'm thinking about doing this instead. What do you think? Everyone was like, don't do it. Like, that's stupid. Keep your job. Like, you can do whatever you want, like, after the 9 to 5, just keep doing your business on the side as a hobby or like a passion project. But I knew, like, in the back of my mind, this was not like something I was just gonna do on the side. This was either I commit, I go all in, I go big or go home, or it's nothing.
I like the way you put that. That's great. You mentioned something once about you can't be half in and half out. Speak about that. Yeah.
You can't be 1 foot. And I have this belief about everything, not just like for career wise nowadays, right? Because I see so many people around me too who are this way with their work, their relationships they're building, right? Situationships are super popular nowadays. Like people are kind of in something, but they're not. Like people are so comfortable with the idea of like having a back door always be open. Like I'm here now, but I can walk away any minute. And like having that option to walk away is so comforting. Anytime, like I'll use the example of like a relationship, right? Like if anytime, no matter if it's a friendship or like a romantic relationship, anytime a minor inconvenience happens and you're like, oh, this is not a good fit. Like I'm done. Like you just like throw the towel in and you're like, good, I'm not going to put in the work. It doesn't get anywhere. You don't get anything meaningful out of it. You're not investing in yourself or the relationship. And it's very like, it's all about like short-term gratification. It's like, whatever I can get this second right now, I'm going to get it and like go out the back door. It's not about like long-term investment, which I think is more valuable than that.
Right. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? A loss, a new path, or an awakening that forced you to rewrite your life? Pivot Point is a podcast that explores those stories. I'm Nick Michael. We'll dive into how pain can spark growth and how crisis leads to clarity. Subscribe to Pivot Point today. Welcome to Pivot Point, Strategy for Change. I'm Nick Michael. Every one of us has experienced that moment when something begins to change inside us before we can explain it. There's a subtle tension, a quiet restlessness, a feeling that something is no longer quite right. Before thought catches up, the body often knows it first. It recognizes the need for change long before the mind has the language to describe what is happening. Awareness begins with that lived experience, and as it deepens, choice and action can emerge more naturally. That's what this show is built around. Today's guest lived that sequence in a way most people only talk about. This isn't a show about quick fixes or 5-step frameworks. It's a show for people willing to sit inside the discomfort of not knowing yet, because that's usually where the real pivot is hiding. Not in the moment everyone else can see, but in the quieter one before it. Today's guest lived that sequence in a way most people only talk about. My guest walked away from a stable, well-paying corporate path, the kind of path her entire upbringing had been engineered to produce, and traded it for a role that paid $5,000 less a month, with no guarantee of anything beyond that. She spent 2 years building in the dark. No market testing, no data, just belief. Today, the product she helped build serves over 300,000 users and did $200,000 in revenue in its first 3 months alone. But the more interesting story isn't the traction. It's what it cost her internally to bet everything on an unproven idea and what she had to unlearn about identity, reputation, and what a good life is supposed to look like. It's the story of someone raised inside a very specific definition of success who had to go looking for a different one, largely alone and largely without proof that a different one even existed. Please welcome to Pivot Point, Strategy for Change, Aurora Winters, co-founder and COO of Evermind Labs. Aurora, welcome to Pivot Point.
Wow,
It's
what
great
an
to have you.
intro it was. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm very excited to get to this conversation, as you know. And here on Pivot Point, we talk about the moment where the awareness comes to us before we make the actual change. I want you to go back to a point in time that you'd like to share with us about a pivot point that you had.
You know, Nick, a little bit not dissimilar to your experience where you had the sudden realization. I was working, like you said, a boring 9 to 5, very stable, had a promotion incoming. Everything seemed to have been going the right way, from an outside perspective, but only I knew something was off. So I had one experience that was like, probably happens with everybody when it comes to a corporate job. Like you get these like corporate politics and just like, things are not exactly like super healthy dynamics in a workspace. And I was kind of realizing my passion wasn't lying in like trying to climb up the ladder my entire life. I wasn't going to spend the next 50 years being on this endless chase of like who gets to the top of the pyramid. And I was noticing a change in myself where I couldn't really concentrate 100% on the work that I was doing. I wasn't passionate. I was losing drive. Every day I'd go to work in the back of my mind thinking, how am I going to run my business? Right? Like I was distracted. I couldn't invest all my time and energy into this thing. So I think that experience was like, it was just compounding each day. Like every day something new happens and I was realizing I was not learning. I was not growing as a person. And it took a lot of courage to walk away from that because, when you're kind of like in a space surrounded by everyone who has chosen this path, it kind of seems like it was the only right answer. And people look at you like you're crazy when you tell them, well, I'm just going to quit this and like put all my savings. And it's actually, in fact, it's not a job that paid $5,000 less. It was a job that paid negative $5,000 a month because I was putting my own money into something that was paying nothing. Yeah. So for me, I would say the change started gradually. And then like more over time, I was kind of noticing, how unhappy I was and like, I had to take a risk.
Yeah, no, your story is fascinating because I know you come from generations of physicians, and for much of your life, it seemed almost expected that you would become the next one, right? So instead, you chose a completely different path, one that probably required just as much courage as becoming a doctor would have. I'm curious what that decision was like, not only for you, but for your family.
Yeah, so we have a joke inside the family that there's a curse of every generation. There's one physician. And like, it was always like a guessing game of like, who was going to be the next one in my generation. So far, nobody's done it. So I think we're breaking the curse.
Wow.
But yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of, growing up, I think maybe a lot of Asian kids may relate to this, being from an immigrant family. You do have a high pressure and expectation to achieve and to do well, by conventional standards, whether it be like becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer. So for me to walk away from, like my whole life, there's always this mentality of being one step ahead in the country I grew up because it's just so competitive, right? You try to be the top student starting from elementary school, right? You're like a 7-year-old and like everybody, your teachers, your parents, they're all over you about like getting good grades.
Yes.
To get into the best middle school, the best high school, to then the best college. So I have been like following that path pretty much my entire life. And for me to stop was a huge change to me. Not only to myself, like mentally, it's like, how am I going to tell my grandma? Like I'm quitting my job and like basically having nothing to live off of to pursue this thing that might not even get anywhere.
Right. That's the courage that I'm curious about. As you know, the work I do with children and families, the majority of the work I do is with young people. And I know for many, and there's a high level of expectation, almost perfectionistic. Some of the kids are. What were you like as a child? And how did that shape how you viewed things, how you worked, how you learned, and then eventually how you made the decision to deviate quite a bit from the traditional, conventional? So that's what I'm curious about, because that's the hard part for many.
That's a great question. I think as a kid, I was very disciplined. I almost went to like, I wouldn't call it military style, but it was a very strict school, right? You have like this schedule to the minute, like, 12 to 12:45, you're at lunch and you have to finish like every last bite. You cannot leave anything on the plate before you exit. Like, I grew up living with rules like these. So for me, I guess that courage, I have a lot to thank for my friends and the people that were just kind enough to like give me advice and like show me a new perspective. For me, something that helped was surrounding myself with people that did not only agree with my path, right? So like people who were taking risks and like doing things that potentially my values that I had would have disagreed against, but like being open-minded to that and being curious, right? So like, why are you making these decisions? Like, this doesn't make any sense in my perspective. Like, you're being completely crazy. But like, I guess giving people the benefit of the doubt for me has really helped me in like seeing a world outside of my wall.
Fascinating. Because what I noticed though is with many high achievers, they're usually following a path and it's a routine path. And you would imagine the most of them are wanting to please others. Yeah. And if it's an assigned path and if it's a professional path, like in nursing, medicine, you're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here. You can find Pivot Point Strategy for Change on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like a deeper dive into the work we explore on the show, I invite you to visit my Substack page where I share in-depth articles and reflections. Engineering, architect, lawyer, there's a prescribed path that everyone goes through, and they're usually used to routine, and they're used to, I'm not going to say conforming, but yeah, they're used to conforming to what is expected, and then wanting to live out almost, I have to say, the life that their parents want, because kids usually adopt what they think their parents want. So then there's a point where things change for someone when they finally realize it takes a lot of courage. I'm going to compliment you on your effort to deviate and move towards managing to find a path for yourself that really did not fit the typical traditional family path that you're used to. Is that safe to say that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, like, for me, I think a huge thing that happened in my life was moving to the US. So as you know, I spent, 11 years of my childhood in China. And I think coming here was something that like rocked me to my core because and like, this is what I noticed too in a lot of people who are like multicultural or like bilingual, is that they kind of are more receptive to, what's out there and like what's different. They're not so quick to judge when you're coming from two like such conflicting cultures, right? Because China's like, the Chinese culture is more collectivist. And here in the US, it's all about like, be yourself, yes. Like be whoever you want to be. And when I came here, I didn't know what that meant. Like, what do you mean like be myself? Like, I don't have to like, be this person that like, the gold standard, right? Like be the golden child. Like you check off all these boxes. So that for me was like, made me question everything I was taught from a very early age, that there's a bigger world out there.
Yes. Yeah. My youngest spent a semester in Beijing and in Shanghai. So yeah, so he came back, really with a different perspective and a greater understanding and appreciation the way he described it, and with a lot of nice pictures and movies, so which was really great.
Awesome. I know NYU has a branch in Shanghai.
Yeah, that's exactly where he went. Yep, he went to Shanghai. Yes, and he did a lot of traveling there, which is what he wanted. And I was so happy for him that he did that. I mean, as you know, I used to work for the airlines, so when I worked for Pan Am and all these other airlines, it was my opportunity to really travel and see the world. I didn't make much money, but I eventually made the transition from the business field into the world that I'm in right now. And so that was my, experience of my own pivot. So that's where I really can connect with someone and with a story that you have where you're coming literally from a different culture, different country, but really having a greater appreciation for both worlds and then really realizing and understanding who you are and what you want. So you've described your old life as being like watching a movie where you already know the ending. So walk me back to that season. what did an average week actually look like? And where in your body did you first feel that this couldn't be the rest of your story just before you made the leap into being a founder?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd wake up, right? Very different. So my days when I was a student was very different from when I was like working. As a student, you're kind of, I guess you feel like you're learning. I would say most of us were going through the motions in the sense of like, yes, you're going to class and yes, you're learning and it feels like you're moving somewhere. But I think, it seems like people are just doing it to get a degree instead of like really doing it for like what they knew they wanted in life. And then when I was in corporate, it was just like you wake up, it's the same day every single day. I talk to clients. So I worked in finance and, did your spreadsheets, looked at like boring financial data and go to the gym, go back home. And that was, every single day for like a year and a half. So where I started noticing a change first in my body, I would say it's my focus. Like I stopped being able to focus at work because I couldn't stop thinking about my other thing that I really wanted to do. It felt like I had like a doppelganger somewhere else. And like I was physically at work, but like mentally I'm back home, like building a business. And I think this relates to your question as like back to when I was a kid, what I was like. I always known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always knew I wanted to do my own business. And the reason how I knew that was because every single game I would play like on the iPad or whatever, it was like a simulation game, like run a store, open a business, build this from scratch. That's
what I was waiting to hear. I had a sense that was coming up because these moments, they happen at a younger age and it sits and it stays with us. So before you made the leap, you were comfortable, but in your words, you were not happy. How long did you let that gap sit before you let yourself name it out loud?
That's a great question. I honestly,
because there's a gap there before people even recognize it,
I know there was a huge gap because part of me was also in denial, right? It was
that's what I'm looking
for. This well-paying
Good. So tell us about that. Yes. So you must be out of your mind. You must have heard.
Yeah.
You were worth, I say this to my son, you were worth this much. Now you're worth this much. So, because you finished college. Now you're worth this much. So tell us what that.
Throw it all the way. Like everything.
Right. From zero to like whatever. Right. So it's, so how did you manage to break through that? Because
it was difficult. Like, yeah, you're hitting it on the dot, basically. It's that position that I had too. It was in a very big corporate company. So like the positions they had, it was limited. It was like a spot only opens up after somebody leaves, right? So it's like you get it and people don't leave. They like stay all through their retirement. So
for forever, yeah.
Forever, yeah. For a long time. And walking away from that was like, I literally thought to myself, I was like, this could be the dumbest thing I've ever done. Or it could be the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. But your question to the gap, yeah, I was fully in denial, right? It was like, I could not believe that, like, what do you mean this doesn't work for me? It has to work. I'm going to make it work. I hate what I'm doing, but like, there must be some joy to be found here. I would say I had that mentality for about like a good 6 months.
Okay.
Before I just was like, I have to put my foot down. This is not it.
Can you pinpoint whether or not it was an emotional, or what was the emotion, or was it more cognitive? Or physical? Was it in your body? That awareness. Yeah.
I would say the awareness, it was creeping up on me just like through time. Like it just started happening slowly. The moment I put my foot down though, I will say it's completely emotional because to be honest, I don't think anyone can say with confidence, like, at the point they make a decision, 100%, nothing's going to go wrong. Everything's going to be perfect and I'm going to do this. There's a risk that comes with every decision. So I think for me it took a little bit of me being irrational and me being just like, we're going and being like super passionate and having that overcome like all fear and like the unknown.
See, I'm so glad you put it that way because this is exactly what others need to hear. And this is what is so inspiring about your story because when I heard you speak at the cohort that night a month ago, that was the work that you're doing is just incredible. So was there a specific day, a conversation or a moment that you can point to where the decision stopped being hypothetical and then became real? Because it was brewing in the back of your mind. And then sometimes people describe it as like, I saw it clearly and that was it. And that's what convinced me. You convinced yourself at some point.
Yeah, I'm trying to trace back to the exact moment. I just remember when I thought about quitting my job, I called a couple of my friends. I was like, hey, like, I'm thinking about doing this instead. What do you think? Everyone was like, don't do it. Like, that's stupid. Keep your job. Like, you can do whatever you want, like, after the 9 to 5, just keep doing your business on the side as a hobby or like a passion project. But I knew, like, in the back of my mind, this was not like something I was just gonna do on the side. This was either I commit, I go all in, I go big or go home, or it's nothing.
I like the way you put that. That's great. You mentioned something once about you can't be half in and half out. Speak about that. Yeah.
You can't be 1 foot. And I have this belief about everything, not just like for career wise nowadays, right? Because I see so many people around me too who are this way with their work, their relationships they're building, right? Situationships are super popular nowadays. Like people are kind of in something, but they're not. Like people are so comfortable with the idea of like having a back door always be open. Like I'm here now, but I can walk away any minute. And like having that option to walk away is so comforting. Anytime, like I'll use the example of like a relationship, right? Like if anytime, no matter if it's a friendship or like a romantic relationship, anytime a minor inconvenience happens and you're like, oh, this is not a good fit. Like I'm done. Like you just like throw the towel in and you're like, good, I'm not going to put in the work. It doesn't get anywhere. You don't get anything meaningful out of it. You're not investing in yourself or the relationship. And it's very like, it's all about like short-term gratification. It's like, whatever I can get this second right now, I'm going to get it and like go out the back door. It's not about like long-term investment, which I think is more valuable than that.
Right. I've heard you mention that the only thing that carried you through was belief, not evidence. How do you tell the difference between belief that's leading you somewhere real and belief that's just stubbornness in disguise?
That's a great question. I think as a founder, I ask myself all the time because it's important to know, right, when you are really onto something versus just being blind to like criticisms and being like, I'm all in, even though like it's actually like a really not super smart idea. So I'll start with why I have the belief first. I have my co-founders to thank for that. So the three of us are a really good support system to each other because as a founder, you face so much criticism and you have a lot of doubt, right? As you know, like we were building the product for 2 years in the dark with no validation, no product market fit, which I don't recommend to anybody who's building out.
Say it as it is so people can hear and speak more about the work that you've been doing with your co-founders. Because I was going to ask about things because I know they're very different in approach than you are as far as you've mentioned how.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so we were training our own model because, so it's, for anyone that doesn't know, Evermind is building the first private and censorship-resistant AI model. So you can think of it like a DuckDuckGo of an AI, right? Or like a Proton Mail of AI. So everything's 100% private and encrypted. Now, the way how we built this was it started off as a crypto project. So me and my co-founders, we have a good understanding of like the crypto market and like the community surrounding that. And then it eventually like progressed into something that was like, well, there's nothing on the market for like an AI model that we're looking for. Why don't we just build one from scratch? Well, not from scratch, but like you get it. Like we're going to train one, we're going to fine tune one. So that whole process took about 2 years with no users, no beta users even. Like it was just us having such a firm belief that this was something that was needed, which looking back was not the smartest thing to have done. But I think the belief, right, of this was we had enough. The reason why I don't encourage anyone to do this was because the three of us, we had a good understanding of the community, of like the surrounding landscape. We all had such diverse backgrounds, right? I had my background in finance. My co-founders studied mathematics, statistics, computer science. So we kind of were able to cover a lot of grounds with our different fields to be like, okay, we're making a reasonable conclusion. So I think it's like working with people that you trust brings in a lot of the belief because I've heard so many horror stories of like other startup founders having a great product, having the great skill set, but just not being able to find the right people, and they get completely screwed over because having a great partner is like one of the most important things you can have when you're running a business. Because I describe it's like almost like a marriage, right? If you really think about it, you're sharing the same vision. You're sharing
Yes.
the same bank account. You're sharing the same product, the name. You're sharing the same future. So like really like it's a lot more complicated than people think it to be. Like people just nowadays like look for co-founders like at an event, right? They just like find somebody and they start building this whole thing with them. But it's actually a way more rigorous process, I think, for something to be successful.
I'm glad you're bringing that up, and I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about what can some founders be cautious of in certain types of personalities or behaviors that you have seen probably from other companies that are signs that they're not getting it's not going to get better, because many people will, just like any other relationship, they believe the other person, they become blind to certain reality of what the person presents, and they look at and they focus on the potential, not the actual. And have you noticed that? And what can you tell founders who are listening, who are curious about how fortunate you are that you've found others who are like-minded but very different backgrounds as far as career and choice?
Skill set, yeah.
Yeah, skill set. Yeah. What can you tell people to watch out for? Because
that's a great question, because I think this is one of the biggest things that could cause a startup to go wrong. So like this is super important to address. I think, well, number one, I would say is, I always tell my co-founders this too when we're hiring, is we as a company, we actually have kind of like, I would say a more Gen Z, quote unquote, hiring approach, in the sense of we don't really look at like what schools you go to, for example. Like I could care less. I mean, I went to an Ivy League school, but like having gone through that experience, I think I can very safely say, I don't think there's anything like separating the supposed like Ivy League kids from like state college. There's no difference. Like we want to evaluate people based on like what you bring to the company, what you can offer, what projects have you done. It's not just like a name you slap a title on. I graduated from Harvard and now I'm this. It's not that, right? So name brands don't mean anything to us. I feel like I'm kind of deviating from your question a little bit.
It's encouraging because this is what others need to hear. I value anything you can say, because others might feel like that's a strike against me because I didn't go to, a highly regarded, let's say, whatever. Ivy
and it's sad when I hear people say that, because I have friends who are like, well, I didn't go to an Ivy League, and like, now I'm not going to have this thing. When I submit my resume, they're not going to take it as seriously as this other kid who went here. And that's just not fair. And it's not true. And I think now, especially as a founder, you realize the skill set that makes people successful in life is so different from the skill set that makes people successful in school. And you have all these so I personally went through this college consulting prep program to get into a good college. And it's just, it's a game you play. It's, in my opinion, very unproductive to somebody's life to spend time even on that, right? So going back to like finding a co-founder, I would say the number one thing is not their hard skill set. Obviously, you want a team that's stacked. You're building in tech. You want people who know what they're doing. But the number one thing we look for is your soft skill set. So, right, this is your ability to communicate. This is your ability to be successful when you're in a team. Your ability to, and in startups, so there's a lot of this, like there are a lot of adversaries. You're facing criticisms, challenges all the time. And you've seen so many successful startup founders haven't gone bankrupt multiple times in their life and like continuing to build from that. So it's kind of a cliche saying, but I think it goes like something like, it doesn't matter where you fell, it matters where you get up.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Or something like
well
that.
Put. Yes. No. The message is there. No, that's clear. So, from your experience, how useful has it been to have co-founders that are very diverse in just about everything, the way you approach it? So, because sometimes people are looking for like-minded, similar,
Yeah.
And because they believe that that's going to be a match. It's like when you're swiping to find a match, right? So.
Right.
They're not looking for somebody who's completely different. So speak a little bit about how that has helped your company.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that, because I think people, especially like if you look at people like on dating apps or like finding friends, they're like, wow, we have so much in common. And
yes.
That's a great thing. But actually, in my mind, all my friendships in my life formed because I saw something that was so different about the person that I would never think of. And that's what like made me want to be friends with them. It was like, well, like, what was your reasoning behind doing this? Like, I'm so curious. Like, tell me more. How did you make these decisions? So my co-founders so I'm someone who's very risk averse. I'm the person that's almost like neurotic when it comes to like, I want to make sure everything has been de-risked. We're doing everything like the way that we were supposed to. I'm a huge overthinker. Now, my co-founder, on the other hand, is somebody he sees an opportunity and he seizes it.
Very complimentary so far.
Very complementary backgrounds. So I think being able to bet on someone who's different than yourself too it takes a little bit of a courage because you're
it does. Yes. So yeah, because you're going against the grain from what someone would think. He's so not like you, or she is so not like you, and you're so both different. And just not for the obvious reasons, but let's say for the foundational reasons about being involved in a company and having a role. But what I know from the work that I've been in the interviews I've done with founders, in the beginning, you end up being a generalist where you are doing everything. And you've got to roll up your sleeves and you've got to then concede to, well, you do this a little bit better, so I'll defer to you. But most founders are creating and building in a solo environment, technically, when they begin, more often than not. So when they're solo, they're looking for others who can benefit them and complement the work that they do. So there's got to be some kind of a ground where they can have some kind of connection, because if they're too different, then they're nervous in the beginning of teaming up when they don't appear to be, and trust. So everything comes back down to trust, and we're talking about a relationship. We're back to relationships.
100%. I was lucky, I think, in this case, just because we had known each other for so long before we started this business, and we've been in other business before. So I knew, their working style very well, and we definitely had that trust. And funny story, how I knew they would be good co-founders was actually during like an argument. It was because our backgrounds are so different and we just did things in such different ways that like a lot of times I would just be like, this is plain stupid. And like they would look at me like I'm stupid. It's like, how could you even think to do that? And like I look at them the same way. But actually we as a team take those as like opportunities to like have a debate and like learn from these diverse perspectives. And during one argument, like we were able to argue and make a productive conclusion and then like go to like have fried chicken on the same night. And that's when I knew, I was like, this is a team that's going to be able to build and grow together.
So what I'm hearing based on what you're saying is that you're leaving it all out there. You're not holding back, because if you hold back in just like any other relationship, then resentment begins to mount and you're suppressing emotion and you're restricting expression. And when that occurs, then there's a lot of passive aggressive reactions sometimes, or overtly, sabotage of someone else's ideas. And it doesn't help when you're working in a small environment, when you're building together compared to. So that's very encouraging to realize that you might argue like brothers and sisters, but you're still, you're not, and you're going to still work with each other and be respectful of one another, and then leave it on the side and then move on. So that is an important aspect that many need to hear. So Evermind Labs is built around a belief that privacy isn't a policy. It's something engineered into the product itself. Where did that conviction come from personally, not just professionally? Because it's easy to accept a double standard once it's invisible enough. You're naming one that most people have simply stopped noticing. And I think that's exactly the kind of clarity this category is missing.
Yeah, with the privacy category, it's something that people have learned to be complacent with.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's not there. The need is huge. The need is there, but people just have simply not been able to, given the option to choose. So we wanted to give this choice to people, right? When you have two products, they're exactly the same. They perform exactly the same, if not better, because our product on a lot of skill performs better than traditional AI models. When you're given the choice, right, which one would you choose? I mean, it's a no-brainer, really. Like, I prefer the one that's keeping all my data private. I get control over it 100%. Personally, the belief came from, growing up. Right. So this goes back to my family values that I grew up with. I was taught and I was told to never go into politics. Now, so this might be different, right, when it comes to like US versus China, but there's a certain risk and danger with exposing yourself, publicly. And I have been very conscious of that from a very young age. So that's why personally it's so important for me to help keep people's data safe. From a professional standpoint, working in finance, I was seeing confidential deal data. I was working with time-sensitive data, right? Or like insider information. And when you look at these information, it's it's like no one cares that you want to buy this boat for $200 million. Like no one on earth probably, like except for your competitor who like also wants the boat, cares about like what you want to price it. So why are we protecting enterprise privacy when it comes to these type of data? And we're not protecting, our personal data where I'm asking very embarrassing questions to my AI. So that didn't feel right.
No, I'm glad you put that. Now, you've pointed out that you said we protect enterprise data fiercely while training AI on people's most private personal conversations. Why do you think that double standard exists? And what does it say about what we actually value?
I think, right, I would say most models right now, they have not been able to successfully find market opportunity in the consumer market that's willing to pay for privacy. So the reason why there's so many B2B enterprises doing privacy is because when it comes to financial deal data, companies, they have the financial incentive to pay for these things, even though the information like really doesn't mean anything to the general public. So for us, we were able to engineer a solution that had a product market fit. So we're able to build a successful business model based on like offering people value and still making sense as a business. I think finding that like intersection in the Venn diagram was important.
So how did that happen that you and your colleagues formed all this together and brought it to this point right now?
That's a loaded question.
Because you're very passionate about it.
Hugely.
And earlier, as I mentioned, what I find that is that in our formative years, even let's say under 10 years old, there are times where there's an impact that something has on us that starts to shape how we think, how we learn, and what we do, and then starts to shape our personality as we go through the middle and high school years to the college years. And then what we think we want, like the traditional course and job out there, profession, may not be what we want. And then we finally realize what we do want and how passionate we are. So then we return back to that original passion, as you mentioned it. Because it could have been a passion project for you, but that wasn't going to stay there. And that takes a lot of courage. So how did this come about where all three people are in sync?
That's right. Yeah. I think that observation is 100% true. I think as we grow up, right? Because when you see like kids talk about like their future careers, what they want to be when they grow up, it's so adorable.
Yeah.
But you sit there, you kind of like know in the back of your head, like 1% of any of this is going to come true. Like, because you experience so much as you growing up, you like face so many hardships, right? That you kind of like, and also like you learn a lot, right? So you're growing as a person, you're changing. A lot of it doesn't, happen the way that you think. But I think as a child, right? So for example, with me, when I had that entrepreneurial spirit, there are things that like stay with you. And it just, as you grew up, it was kind of getting buried, but you kind of have to rediscover it for yourself. Like regain the passion you had when you were a child. How did we all align on this? That is the most beautiful thing that's come together for this. It's crazy to me that there are 3 people right now in the universe that are as invested as me, if not more, in what we're building.
Yeah.
And feel so passionately about it. So I feel so lucky. Honestly, I cannot attribute it to anything but luck. It's just like, I would not be able to like give someone advice on how they could find, people who are as good co-founders as my co-founders.
No, I appreciate hearing that. So it's evident in your expression that you certainly feel fortunate and it shows and it comes through because I think what's driving you is the passion behind this all, which is great to see. So you're drawing a comparison to what Proton did for email, what Mozilla did for browsers, what DuckDuckGo did for search. What does it feel like to be early in a category you believe so passionately about that while you look back on it in hindsight, it's inevitable that we're going to get there? How is that for you?
I would say it feels like building something that, to be honest, the demand was overwhelming. I personally did not even expect it to be something that was so needed. Like I knew that it was very important to have, but it's just everything that's pointing in the direction, right? Including like people's sentiments on social media, where capital is moving in terms of venture funds. Everything is pointing to the same answer, that this is a category that's up and coming. And we had gotten started, early on this, when before it was a huge thing. To be honest, it feels great. It feels like we won $1 million.
I'm
It's
so
just
glad
like,
that you
wow,
put it
you
that
guys
way.
all care about this? Okay,
Yeah.
let's do it.
That's great to hear. Now, Evermind Labs, your company is bootstrapped and now raising its seed round after proving traction most funded startups never reach. What's different about raising capital from a position of leverage rather than need?
Yeah, so because we have a team that's very scrappy,
You're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here.
for all, previous entrepreneurs, we have a little bit of like capital going into this. So compared to other startups, right? I understand most startups really need to raise very early on in order to continue building their product. We were fortunate enough that we were able to have traction. Now, my advice to anybody is don't raise until you really need to. And there's a hype in the startup world of like trying to go to VCs and like, getting funded by these big name brands. And like, it's kind of a similar trend as like when people get into like Ivy League colleges, right? As we were talking about, it's like once you get the name checked off, you're all set to go. Not to say that people shouldn't raise VC money, but like really consider whether you even want to go the VC route, because there are a million other ways you could fund yourself. And in addition to that, your question was about how is it raising from having some leverage? I would say, yeah, it was so important for us to prove the traction first before even going to other people for money, because from my perspective, I am so confident in what we're doing that I'm going to show you I can make money with my own money first.
I like the way you said that. That's great.
Yeah, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, right?
That's perfect. You're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here.
Yeah.
So you're candid that Evermind Labs' growth so far is nowhere near the scale of the vision you're chasing. What does it feel like to be proud, and how far you've come, and simultaneously impatient with how far there is to go? Because I know
this is what keeps me up at night, because we see this exactly like you said, like a Proton Mail to Gmail. There's been a privacy category winner in every category that we've seen, no matter if it's search engine or emails. And we hope to be that for generative AI. So yes, like I'm so proud of the team for how far we made it and how we've all grown as people, which is the most important thing through this process. Was I see my co-founders as completely different people than when we started this. And it's so amazing. This is a team that I'm getting a little off track here, but
no, go right ahead. This is the track.
Yeah. This is a team that like takes pride in building each other up, not just the company, because the whole company, the product is the people. Like we are the people that's making all of this happen. So sorry, remind me of your original question.
No, I just wanted to know, what does it feel like to be proud and how far you've come, and simultaneously impatient with how far there is to go?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I see the vision. I feel that it's so close. And at the same time, there's so much resources and time that we want to spend to get us there. Because also, it's not about rushing. It's not about like, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I want to be the biggest privacy brand. It's actually, we want to do it in a step-by-step, right? So like, for example, we are the only AI that launched with a third-party verification. So we got this verification before we even had a single customer, not after the fact, before. So we want to get every step right, because we understand, right? Like we were saying with looking for relationships and co-founders, trust is the most important thing we have with our customers. That is the one thing that we would never risk anything to lose. So growing quickly would be nice, but we understand that it's going to be a process and we want to do it right.
I want to compliment you directly here that the hardest part of any pivot isn't the leap itself. It's proving to the version of you who stayed safe, that the risk was worth it. And I don't think proof is ever fully finishes. So I think you're right on track. And it certainly, it shows in the way you describe and the way you talk about work that you're doing and the team that you have, which is wonderful. Is there anything that you wanted to tell listeners about yourself or the company that's important that you think they should know?
Yeah. So maybe I'll talk about the core value that led us all to be so passionate about this is that we believe people should have the freedom to think whatever they want. They should be able to have access to information to help them to come to a decision, right? Using their own critical thinking. So with that, I want to spread this message to everyone, right? Your privacy is valuable and your data is valuable. It's not something you should just be giving away. And most people realize this nowadays, right? And there's no need to have this like fear mongering over AI, right? When we have all these alternative solutions to protect your data against, whatever fear people have against like AI profiling me, AI, leaking my data. So just being smart about that and like learning about your options when you're deciding which platform to choose.
Well, very well said. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is there something that you felt you would have wanted to do at some point down the road that you're looking at doing sooner with your company, or anything that comes to mind? The timing issue of something?
Yeah, so I mean, currently our demand is through the roof. We do not have enough talent on the team, to 100% be at where we want to be. So we're looking for talent. We're looking for capital to support the talent, which is a huge part of the reason for why we're raising now. And something that could not come soon enough is our next UI UX refresh. So since we launched this April, we've found various ways, right, including like my favorite part of the day, which is reading our users' feedback emails to our customer support, like being like, whether it be like complimenting us or like complaining. It doesn't matter what it is. I enjoy like seeing user feedback. So we have a lot of those data points that we want to get fixed to make sure our users have a better experience with our product. So currently we've done a complete redesign and we should be pushing everything out in August. So super excited for that. Can't wait.
So that's great to hear that you have those plans coming up. Tell me, as a young person, both working in the traditional corporate field and then breaking away, challenging yourself, tapping into a passion and in a belief that was sitting with you for a very long time, a belief really about yourself and the potential that you had and that you made happen. How has that impacted you, and what kind of compliments or what kind of encouraging words can you give to other young Gen Z people like yourselves? Listening to what comes to isn't recklessness, it's discernment. You didn't leap blind. You leapt after you'd already done the internal work most people would skip. So what you're building at Evermind Labs isn't just a product decision, it's a values decision dressed up as a company. That's rare, and I don't think that it's an accident. You've given a lot of people permission today to sit in the discomfort of feeling lost instead of running from it. That might be the most generous thing that you've shared with us. So I think whatever else you can offer would be so valuable.
I love to talk about that. Yeah, I think a lot of people too, no matter what age range you are, I'm sure people feel lost. It doesn't matter how old you might be. You could be like 50 years old and having a crisis. I experienced it very early on in my life when I moved to a new country with a new culture where I had to form a new identity in my teenage years. And people all experience it differently at different points of their life. But I would say, don't criticize yourself for being lost. Now, when people say, I'm lost, I don't know what I'm doing. I think nobody knows what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm figuring out each day. I think take feeling lost as a luxury. You get to be lost because you're surrounded with so many options. You're surrounded with the opportunity to be lost. Now, coming from having seen kids who might not even get fed, might not even have the right clothes to wear to go to school, or might not even be receiving an education. I think feeling lost is such a privilege, and just take that and sit with it And don't be harsh on yourself for feeling lost, because it's actually, in my opinion, when you feel lost, it's actually where you're going to see the most growth as you look back.
So well said. I appreciate hearing that. I've been doing a focus on Gen Z and the perceptions that people have of Gen Z, both in the workforce or even privately or even when they're younger. I wanted to pull up a question to see if I can get your reaction to it. There are a lot of generalizations that are unfair, or maybe they are fair. Your perspective would be certainly useful in having and putting it out there for others to hear. So let me just pull up the question. Which perceptions are most likely to hold Gen Z back, and what proactive steps can they take to address or reframe them for greater workplace impact? I'm going to leave it up for a moment. So in the work that you've done, and even for yourself, I'm sure you've recognized that there are a lot of perceptions that people have of Gen Z. I'm going to just pull up some of them, and then we can take a look at this together. First, and there's no specific order. I didn't number it. I used letters to demonstrate it. So they can't handle feedback. No professional communication. Phone dependent. Needs constant validation. Job hops under pressure. Too easily offended. Brings parents to interviews. Tech-savvy people incompetent. Only works for causes they believe in. The L word. Lazy. Doesn't want to pay dues. Work-life balance obsessed. Entitled too early. Lacks resilience. Over-dependent on validation. I'll leave it up for a moment for you to take a look. Does any of it stand out to you as far as being fair or unfair? And if it is true, what kind of reaction then what kind of suggestions or advice can you give Gen Z kids to address it?
And I think it's a very Gen Z thing in itself to laugh at this, because I think the Gen Zs as a generation, people kind of see us as like not taking anything seriously. And some of these can absolutely be true depending on the person. But also a lot of these I see are not like a flaw, so to say, right? For example, like only working for causes they believe in. It could absolutely be true. I have my personal hypothesis on why that is, and like why as a generation
go ahead, tell us.
I think it's because we haven't had our generation of the major setback. I think every generation before us has experienced like some kind of war, some kind of like economic depression, and some kind of like major hardship they had to deal with and work through. And us as a generation have been fortunate enough to have not, something's probably coming, I think. But so far, we kind of grew up in a stable environment, or we're too young to understand the crazy things that were going on in the world. So it's also another privilege to be able to work for causes you believe in, because that in itself means you obviously had, choices where you could still feed yourself and do something you love. Most people don't really get that choice. Yes, please. That's really helpful. I think the phone dependent is 100% true. I think everybody is addicted to their phone. And as a downside, being on these like short form video platforms, it's trained all of our attention spans, not just Gen Zs, to be so short. And this ties back to what we're talking about with like only being able to make short term investments and like getting instant gratification, which is very harmful in some instances. But I also think there is an upside to that, right? Where as a founder, and if you're building your own business, you understand how important it is to have a viral sense, to be able to make content you make go viral on the internet, aka. So having a good grasp on how to capture people's attention, how to make content that like would guarantee visibility is actually such an underrated skill set, just being good at social media. So I think people should use that to their advantage. Like if you're Gen Z, you're on your phone all day, you probably understand what forms of videos are more likely to go viral.
So I like the way you put that as an asset and as a benefit, as a strength to use it to their advantage. Anything else that you suggest to anyone listening who might identify with, yeah, that's me. I like work-life balance, obsessed. Is that a true?
I think it's true. I think it's absolutely true. I mean, okay. When I was picking a full-time job out of college, I went with the option that had better work life. My personal reason for that was because I knew I wanted to grow outside of my work. I knew work could only give me so much, and I needed the free time.
I think it's great that you knew what you wanted and you were able to achieve that, and then work from there, because that, you see, you started somewhere, realized this isn't the path for the next, if you said 50 years, that's wonderful. If you want to do that long, that's great. And then you took that experience, or you took that emotion and then channeled it and put it right back out there because you got that experience. I think that's wonderful. You know, Aurora, I want to thank you for being so unguarded about what this pivot actually cost you, not just what it earned you. You know, there's a version of your story that's just a founder highlight reel, the users, the revenue, the second round. But the version that matters is the one where a woman raised to want certainty chose to build a company inside 2 years of silence and self-doubt because some quieter part of her knew the predictable ending wasn't hers to live. And what you've given us today isn't a success story dressed up as an interview. It's a reminder that awareness always arrives first, usually as discomfort, long before it turns into a decision anyone else can see. You felt the shift in your body before you had language for it, and you moved anyway, without data, without guarantees, and without your family's blueprint to fall back on. Now, that's not just a founder story, that's a pivot, and that's what a pivot point actually is. Not the headline, the moment right before it, when you're still standing in the dark, not knowing if belief is enough, and you move anyway. I think this is amazing, and I just want to compliment the work that you and your colleagues are doing with Evermind Labs, really.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you and Stefan, you guys are just killing it out there in the startup scene in New York. Really appreciate that.
That's so nice to hear from you. I really, really appreciate that. And for listeners, I want to leave you with the one question that I like to ask at the end of every episode. Think about it. What's your pivot?
Here with Aurora Winters from Evermind Labs. And Aurora, it was great to have you on Pivot Point Strategy for Change. Please tell me a little bit more about what you'd like to tell other listeners what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so Evermind Labs is building the first private AI solution. And the reason that we're building for that is exactly the time that we're experiencing right now. People's chat logs are getting indexed, it's getting linked to courts. All these data links are happening around the world because of these AI chat logs. What we built here is a secure encrypted solution for all your AI logs so that all your data can stay 100% private. Everybody has the freedom to think their thoughts in private.
Thank you very much, Aurora. Good luck with your company. Looking forward to speaking to you again. Thank you again. Great to see you.
What's your pivot point?